What does it feel like when someone looks at you and decides you don't deserve the place you've already earned on a crowded plane? A teenage black girl sat quietly in her assigned seat, ticket in hand. Then a white man loomed over her, declaring it was his. The air grew heavy. The crew hesitated, the passengers waited, and in that instant, the young girl faced a painful choice: surrender her dignity, or hold on and risk being humiliated in front of everyone. We've all been there, haven't we? That moment when you ask yourself, do I shrink to keep the peace, or do I stand, even if it means standing alone? But here's a twist no one saw coming. The girl's mother wasn't just any parent. She was the unseen force behind the very airline, a CEO who had spent years in the shadows. And in that one moment, she was faced with her own choice: continue hiding, or step forward to defend her daughter in front of the world. If you were in their place, what would you do? This story is about courage, justice, and claiming your seat in life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. The cabin was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning flight out of Atlanta. The kind of quiet that usually comes right before takeoff, when passengers are buckling in, scrolling through their phones, or adjusting their seat belts. But in row 2, a storm was about to break. A tall white man in an expensive gray suit stopped short in the aisle. His rolling bag blocked traffic behind him, but he didn't care. His sharp blue eyes locked on the young black girl sitting in seat 2A, his seat, or so he thought. "Excuse me," he said, his tone sharp, impatient. "That's my seat." The girl looked up, startled but polite. Her name was Naomi Ellis, just 17, wearing a navy hoodie with her high school crest stitched on the front. Her laptop rested on the tray table, open to slides for the National Youth Tech Summit she was traveling to in Boston. She pushed back a loose curl of hair and spoke softly, but firmly. "I think there must be a mistake. This is seat 2A. It's on my ticket." The man gave a short laugh, a scoff more than anything, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Sweetheart, this seat isn't for kids. First class is for platinum members. You must have gotten lost." A ripple of unease ran through the nearby passengers. A mother across the aisle tightened her grip on her toddler's hand. A businessman in 3C shifted uncomfortably, pretending to look at his phone. The silence grew heavier. Naomi straightened in her seat, her voice trembling just a little, but clear. "I'm not lost. My ticket says 2A. I checked twice." The man leaned in, close enough that Naomi could smell his aftershave, sharp, overpowering, like someone who wanted the world to notice his presence. "Listen," he muttered, lowering his voice, but not his contempt. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Slide back to coach where you belong. Let's not embarrass ourselves. Embarrass ourselves." The words hit Naomi like a slap. She felt heat crawl up her neck. She glanced down at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She thought of texting her mom, but she hesitated. Her mother, Elise Ellis, had taught her all her life to hold her head high, to never back down when she was right. Never let them push you out of your place. Naomi, not in the classroom, not in life, not anywhere. But it was hard. So hard. The flight attendant nearest them, a woman with a neat blonde bun and a tight smile, approached. Her name tag read Linda Meyer. She glanced at the man, then at Naomi, then back at the man. Her tone was cautious. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" He handed it over with a smug grin. 2A, as always. I've sat here every month for the last 5 years. Naomi fumbled for her own pass, her fingers trembling as she pulled it from the pocket of her hoodie. Here, she said, her voice firmer now. It says 2A, Flight 468 to Boston. Linda looked between the two passes, her forehead creasing. She glanced back at Naomi, then at the man, then gave a nervous laugh. Well, this is unusual. We'll get it sorted out. The man leaned back with a huff, crossing his arms. Unusual. It's simple. She's sitting in the wrong place. I'm not about to argue over this with a child. The word child dripped with dismissal. Naomi's chest tightened. Linda hesitated again. She knew the airline valued loyalty passengers like Gregory Holt. His name was printed bold on the Platinum Elite Pass he carried like a trophy. Customers like him spent thousands each year. They expected deference, obedience. Naomi sat frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to say something more, to fight back, but her throat felt dry. Around her, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes. People were watching, but no one spoke up. No one said, "She has a right to be here." Naomi's phone buzzed. A reminder popped up: presentation in 24 hours. Her slides, her research, months of late nights all leading to tomorrow. And here she was, being told she didn't belong in a seat she had already earned. She pressed her thumb down and typed a single line to her mother. "Mom, they're trying to take my seat." At that moment, the engines hummed louder, filling the silence with a low vibration. But inside Naomi's chest, the silence was deafening. Passengers whispered. The businessman in 3C raised his phone slightly, angling it as if to record. The mother with the toddler frowned, shaking her head. Gregory Holt smirked, loosening his tie. You see, even she knows she doesn't belong here. Look at her. This isn't her world. Naomi turned her face to the window, blinking back the sting in her eyes. She whispered to herself. Words she had memorized since childhood. I belong wherever I've worked to be. No one can tell me otherwise. Still, her hands trembled as she tightened her grip on her phone. She waited for her mother's reply. The cabin was silent again, but this time it was the silence before something breaks, and something was about to break. Naomi sat stiffly in her seat, the phone still glowing faintly in her hand. She could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips, every beat reminding her she was being watched, judged, measured against expectations she hadn't created. The murmur of passengers behind her grew louder, like a hive buzzing, though no one stepped in. She forced herself to inhale slowly, then exhale the way her mother had taught her years ago. Elise Ellis always said that breathing was an anchor when the world tried to sweep you away. Naomi closed her eyes and pictured the little meditation room in their house back in Atlanta, a candle flickering on the shelf. Her mother's calm voice saying, "Control the breath, Naomi, and you control the moment." It was easier said than done here, surrounded by strangers who assumed she was out of place. Her thoughts drifted back to the weeks leading up to this flight. For months, she had buried herself in research for her project, an innovative system for affordable solar panels designed to help low-income neighborhoods cut their electricity bills. She had tested models in her garage, wiring tiny circuits together, sometimes burning her fingers on soldering irons. She stayed up late tweaking code, building prototypes, recording results. Her teachers had called her ambitious. Her friends had teased her for being a mad scientist, but Naomi didn't mind. When she learned she'd been accepted to present at the National Youth Tech Summit in Boston, her excitement was electric. She had practiced her pitch in front of her bedroom mirror until her voice cracked. She believed this was her chance to prove that her ideas and her place in the world of science mattered. Now, sitting on this flight, all of that confidence felt fragile. Gregory Holt was still looming in the aisle, muttering under his breath about entitled kids and people who didn't earn their way. Naomi clenched her jaw, refusing to look at him again. Instead, she remembered a night just a week ago when she confessed her fears to her mother over dinner. What if I mess it up? What if I stand on that stage and they don't take me seriously because I'm just a girl? Her mother had paused, setting down her fork, and studied Naomi with eyes full of quiet strength. Elise never raised her voice, but her words carried weight. Naomi, you will be underestimated all your life. Because you're young, because you're black, because you're a woman. Some people won't see your worth until you force them to. But here's the truth. You don't have to prove your humanity to anyone. You belong in every room you walk into, because you've done the work to get there. Naomi had nodded, soaking in the reassurance, but in the pit of her stomach, doubt lingered. She thought of that conversation now as Holt pressed the flight attendant with more complaints. His voice rose, full of irritation. Do you know how much money I spend with this airline? I've got more miles than most of these people have in their entire lives. And you're telling me a kid in a hoodie gets my seat. Ridiculous. Linda Meyer, the attendant, kept her polite mask in place, but Naomi noticed the twitch in her jaw. She was torn, serve the loyal platinum customer or uphold the ticketing system. Naomi felt a sting in her chest. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about how easily people assumed her presence was a mistake, an error in the system. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her mother. Stay calm. I'm coming. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by guilt. Should she have called her mother? Shouldn't she be able to stand her ground on her own? She hated that she still needed rescuing. Elise had raised her to be strong, independent. Naomi whispered under her breath, almost like a mantra, I can handle this. I can. But the truth was, her hands were still trembling. A man across the aisle caught her eye. He was middle-aged, in a brown jacket, watching quietly. For a second, she thought he might speak up, but he only gave her a small nod, as if to say, I see you. Hang in there. Even that tiny gesture meant something. Naomi glanced back down at her slides. Charts, diagrams, bullet points stared back at her from the laptop screen. She had poured herself into this project because she believed technology could lift communities like hers. Yet, in this moment, one man's arrogance threatened to make her feel small, unworthy. She closed the laptop with a snap. Her thoughts wandered further back, to when she was 12, sitting in her mother's office for the first time. Elise had just been appointed CEO of Horizon Skies Airways after years of climbing through a male-dominated industry. Naomi had watched her mother that day, standing tall in a conference room filled with skeptical faces. Some of those men didn't think Elise deserved to lead, but Elise had delivered her vision with such calm authority that by the end of the meeting, the doubt had shifted to respect. Naomi had never forgotten that image. Her mother never yelled. She didn't need to. Her strength came from an unshakable certainty of who she was. Naomi wanted to be like that, but right now, in seat 2A, she wasn't sure she could. Gregory Holt leaned against the seat back with exaggerated impatience. We're wasting time. Just get her out of here." His words rang like a verdict. Linda Meyer cleared her throat. "Sir, please, let me confirm with the gate agents. We may need to double-check the reservation system." Naomi's voice finally broke through, quiet but steady. "I have nothing to prove. I paid for this seat. I have every right to be here." The man sneered. "Paid for, or your parents did, doesn't matter. Money doesn't buy class." Naomi felt anger rise, but she bit it back. She knew her mother would tell her, "Don't waste your fire on people who feed off it. Save it for your purpose." So she sat still, waiting, breathing, counting the seconds until her mother arrived. For the first time in her young life, Naomi realized this wasn't just about enduring, it was about deciding whether she would shrink to fit someone else's version of her worth, or hold her ground until truth stepped in. She chose to wait. She chose not to move. The hum of the plane grew louder as passengers settled uneasily. A few more phones lifted, recording quietly. The air was thick with expectation. Naomi pressed her palms against her knees to still the trembling. She looked out the window, sunlight pouring across the wing. Somewhere in the distance, a jet roared skyward. She imagined herself standing at the podium in Boston, speaking to a crowd that finally listened not because of her appearance, but because of her ideas. The thought steadied her. Her phone buzzed again, a new message from Elise. "I'm here. Stay strong." Naomi exhaled. The storm was coming, but this time she wouldn't be facing it alone. Gregory Holt hated waiting. To him, waiting was for people with less power, people who had to prove themselves. He was not one of those people. At least, that's what he believed. He had built a career out of making demands, and for years the world had rewarded him for it. Standing in the narrow aisle of Flight 468, he adjusted the cuffs of his gray suit jacket and smoothed his tie. His reflection shimmered faintly in the small, polished surface of the overhead bin. He smirked at it, as if reassuring himself that he still looked the part, successful, commanding, entitled to whatever he wanted. He glanced again at Naomi Ellis, still sitting in 2A. She was quiet, staring at the window, but he saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her hands tightened into fists in her lap. He interpreted it not as courage, but as weakness. To Gregory, silence meant submission. Unbelievable. He muttered loud enough for several rows to hear. "The standards of this airline have gone downhill. Any kid with a ticket thinks they can take premium seats now. What's the point of loyalty if this is what happens?" A man behind him shifted and cleared his throat, but didn't say anything. Gregory smirked again. People rarely contradicted him. They knew better. His mind drifted back to years of special treatment, first-class upgrades, champagne served without him asking, pilots greeting him by name before departure. He had grown used to those gestures, convinced that his money bought him not only comfort but status. Status that put him above the everyday crowd, above the rules meant for ordinary people. And then this girl, sitting in his seat, a girl who looked like she had never been in a boardroom, who probably had no idea what real power looked like. Gregory tapped his boarding pass against his palm and glanced again at the attendant. Linda Meyer, who stood nervously near the galley. She was clearly torn, but he felt confident she would lean his way. She always did. Staff always did. "Linda," he said, raising his voice just enough to sound commanding. "You know me. You know how many miles I've flown. Tell me you're not really considering siding with this child over a platinum elite customer." Linda forced a professional smile. Mr. Holt, we're doing everything we can to resolve the seating confusion. I've already asked the gate to recheck the system. Please give us a moment. A moment. His laugh was harsh. I've given you 5 already. This is absurd. Naomi's heart pounded, but she refused to look at him. She thought of her mother's text. Stay strong. I'm coming. It was the only thing keeping her still in that seat. Gregory leaned closer to Linda, lowering his voice but still letting the nearby passengers hear his irritation. If this doesn't get resolved properly, I'll be calling corporate. You know what that means, don't you? I've had people fired for less. Linda swallowed hard. She wanted to tell him off, but years of serving customers like Gregory had conditioned her to keep smiling, to keep the peace. She hated the system that gave so much power to frequent flyers, but she also feared the consequences of defiance. Meanwhile, the tension in the cabin thickened. Passengers glanced at one another, phones discreetly raised. Some whispered about the confrontation. Others sat frozen, unwilling to intervene. Gregory finally turned back to Naomi, his voice dripping with condescension. Look, kid, I don't want to ruin your day. I'm sure Coach will be just fine for you. You'll have more people your age back there anyway. Why don't you make it easy for everyone and switch seats? Naomi inhaled slowly. Every instinct told her to shrink away, to avoid conflict, but something in her chest hardened. She remembered her mother walking into her 6th grade classroom after a teacher had accused Naomi of plagiarizing an essay simply because it was too advanced. Elise hadn't shouted. She had calmly laid out proof of Naomi's work, dismantling the teacher's assumptions until silence was the only response. Naomi had watched in awe as her mother's presence turned humiliation into vindication. She whispered under her breath now, I won't move. Gregory leaned in again, his shadow falling across her tray table. What was that? Naomi lifted her eyes to meet his. They were steady, even if her voice shook. I said, I won't move. This is my seat. For a moment, Gregory blinked, surprised by her defiance. Then his lips curled into a sneer. You think one stubborn sentence makes you belong here. Let me tell you something about the world. Little girl, money and loyalty decide who belongs, not tickets printed by mistake, and not attitude. The businessman in 3C finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. She showed her ticket. It says 2A. Seems clear enough to me. Gregory spun around. Excuse me, and who are you exactly? Someone who's tired of listening to this? The man replied. You're making a scene. Gregory's cheeks flushed. For a man who thrived on control, public challenge was intolerable. He straightened his jacket again, his tone icy. Fine. If that's how you all want to play it, I'll take this higher. Don't blame me if heads roll. Linda tried to calm him again. Mr. Holt, please. We'll have an answer soon. I need you to take your seat until then. He ignored her, pacing the small space between rows 2 and 3, every step echoing with entitlement. He didn't care if others were inconvenienced. In his mind, inconvenience was something other people endured for him. Naomi looked at her phone again. Her mother hadn't responded since the last message. She didn't know if Elise was already on her way, or if she was stuck in another terminal, fighting through airport security. But Naomi knew this when her mother arrived. Everything would change. Still, she couldn't rely only on her mother. She had to stand for herself, too. She straightened her back, gripping the armrest firmly, and prepared for whatever came next. Gregory stopped pacing and stared down at her again. "You're going to regret making this difficult." Naomi met his gaze, steady this time. "No, I won't." The words landed heavier than she expected, drawing a few audible murmurs from passengers nearby. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it carried conviction. Gregory frowned, unsettled for the first time. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, the cabin door opened again at the front. A new figure stepped inside. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Naomi's heart leapt. She knew that silhouette anywhere. Her mother was here. The cabin door closed behind her with a firm click, and for a moment the air seemed to shift. Elise Ellis stood just inside the threshold, her black blazer perfectly tailored, her heels steady against the thin carpet. She had walked into countless boardrooms filled with skeptical eyes, but there was something different about stepping into this narrow cabin where her daughter sat under scrutiny. Naomi's chest loosened at the sight of her. Relief rushed through her like a tide, though she quickly wiped the expression from her face. She wanted to look strong, not desperate. Still, her mother's presence gave her something she had been losing a sense of ground beneath her feet. Passengers craned their necks to see who had entered. Some expected another attendant, maybe a manager sent to quiet the commotion. But Elise carried herself differently. There was an authority in her calm gaze, a quiet gravity that made people lean back as if space naturally opened for her. Gregory Holt noticed it too, but misread it. He smirked and waved toward Naomi as if inviting Elise into his corner. "Finally, someone who can help clear this up. Ma'am, you'll want to tell your daughter she's in my seat. I've flown Horizon Skies for over a decade. Platinum Elite, this is my spot." Elise's eyes flicked to him only briefly before landing on Naomi. She walked down the aisle with unhurried steps, every move deliberate, like a conductor entering her orchestra. Naomi could feel the subtle reassurance in each stride. She wasn't rushing, wasn't flustered, she was in control. When Elise reached row 2, she placed a gentle hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Naomi nodded, though her throat was tight. She whispered back, "He tried to make me move." Elise straightened, her expression cool but firm, and turned toward Gregory. For a moment she said nothing. The silence stretched long enough that he shifted uncomfortably. Then she spoke, her voice steady, neither raised nor hurried. "My daughter is not in your seat." Gregory laughed, assuming she was just another protective parent. "With all due respect, ma'am, you're out of your depth. I've flown this airline more than some pilots. My loyalty should mean something. She's mistaken, and it's causing a scene." Several passengers glanced at one another. A few shook their heads. Others pulled out their phones to capture what they knew was building into something larger. Elise kept her gaze on Gregory, unblinking. "What's causing a scene," she said slowly, "is a man refusing to accept the truth in front of him because he cannot believe a young black girl belongs in the same seat he does." The words landed like a stone in water, rippling through the cabin. Naomi felt a rush of pride burn through her chest. Gregory scoffed. "Don't make this about race. I'm talking about loyalty, about rules, about respect for paying customers." Elise raised one brow slightly. "And you think respect means humiliating a teenager in public. You think loyalty buys you the right to decide who belongs here." He opened his mouth again, but Elise's composure unsettled him. He wasn't used to women holding the floor this way, measured, unyielding, without raising their voices. Linda Meyer stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, I'm trying to sort this out with the gate." Could you, Elise, cut her off gently, her tone kind but immovable? No need to sort it out further. She has the right seat. That is the end of it. Gregory bristled, heat rising to his face. And who exactly are you to decide what's the end of it? The question hung in the air. Passengers leaned forward, sensing something about to shift. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. She had seen her mother in moments like this before. Elise had a way of letting someone dig their own hole before she delivered the truth that buried them. Elise leaned in just slightly, her voice lowering but somehow carrying across the cabin. "I am Elise Ellis. I don't just decide because I'm her mother. I decide because this is my airline. I own Horizon Skies." For a breathless instant, silence swallowed the cabin. Every sound seemed to pause the hum of the engines, the shuffle of bags, even the crying toddler across the aisle. Naomi could almost hear her own heartbeat. Gregory blinked, as if the words had struck him harder than he expected. "You what?" Elise repeated, her tone calm as ever. "I am the CEO and owner of Horizon Skies Airways. And you, sir, are out of line." Gasps whispered around the cabin, phones lifted higher, red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. Naomi sat taller, her chest swelling with something she hadn't let herself feel until now, vindication. Gregory's face flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous. You're making up stories. Owners don't just walk into planes." Elise tilted her head. "Why not? I fly my airline like anyone else, but unlike you, I don't confuse loyalty points with entitlement." A ripple of laughter moved through the passengers, quick but undeniable. Gregory stiffened, glaring at them. Elise's gaze sharpened. "You tried to belittle my daughter, to strip her of her dignity. That is unacceptable. Not on my planes, not in my company, not ever." For the first time, Gregory faltered. He searched for his usual weapons: intimidation, bluster, but they slid uselessly from his hands. The weight of authority in Elise's voice was unshakable. Linda Meyer looked relieved, as though the burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The businessman in 3C nodded in quiet approval. The mother with the toddler clapped once, softly, then stopped, embarrassed until more joined in. A small wave of applause spread down the cabin. Elise turned back to Naomi, her hand returning to her daughter's shoulder. "You did well," she said gently. "You stayed where you belonged." Naomi swallowed against the tightness in her throat. Her mother's presence. Her words. It was like the room had shifted, the very air heavier with truth. Gregory tried one last time, his voice breaking slightly. "You can't just kick me out. I've earned my place here." Elise met his eyes. "Seats are not earned by arrogance. They're earned by respect, and you've shown none." The silence that followed was not the silence of hesitation. It was the silence of decision. Something was about to happen, and everyone knew it. As the cabin buzzed with the quiet disbelief of Elise's revelation, Naomi studied her mother's face. Elise looked calm, as she always did, but Naomi knew better than most what lived beneath that composure. She had watched her mother wrestle for years with the decision to stay behind the scenes, to build her empire quietly, out of reach from those who doubted her because of her skin, her gender, or her roots. Naomi had always wondered if it was fear that kept her mother so private, or strategy. Now, in this tense first-class cabin, Elise was forced to step into the light she had so often avoided. Naomi glanced at her mother's hand still resting firmly on her shoulder. She wanted to ask, "How did you learn to be this strong? How do you never flinch?" But she already knew the answer lay in the years before Horizon Skies became a household name. Elise's mind flickered to those years as well. She remembered the tiny office she rented in her early 30s, with peeling paint on the walls and a second-hand desk. She had been an operations manager at a regional airline then, often the only black woman in the room. Meetings were battles fought with polite smiles. Every suggestion she made was met with hesitation until a man echoed the same point, and suddenly it became brilliant. Elise learned to bide her time, to let her results speak louder than her frustration. There were nights she came home bone-tired, her young daughter asleep, her mind filled with doubts. She wondered if it was foolish to dream of building something greater, of creating an airline culture that put dignity at its core. But the doubts never kept her still for long. She worked, saved, partnered, and when the chance came to buy into a struggling regional carrier, she risked everything. People told her she was reckless, that airlines ate money and spit out failed executives. She nodded, but quietly doubled her effort. She had walked through fire to get to where she was now, and yet, even as the CEO, she had chosen invisibility, allowing others to believe Horizon Skies was simply run by a faceless board. It was easier than being judged, attacked, or dismissed in the public eye. She thought staying unseen gave her control, but here, watching Gregory Holt sneer at her daughter, she realized invisibility was no longer an option. Gregory muttered again, refusing to yield. "You think being a CEO makes you right. Titles don't mean respect. Earning miles, spending money, that's what counts. I've been here longer than your company's even been around." Elise's eyes softened, though her stance remained strong. In that moment, she wasn't just the CEO. She was the girl she had once been, working double shifts to pay her way through college, dismissed in her first interviews because she didn't look the part. She thought of the investors who had laughed at her proposals, telling her to aim smaller. She remembered the sting of being invisible, of being silenced. Her voice carried all of that history as she replied, "Respect is not bought, Mr. Holt, and loyalty is not measured in miles flown. It is measured in how we treat each other when the rules seem inconvenient. You speak of loyalty, but you have none to the truth, none to decency, none to the people who serve you every month." The businessman in 3C gave a quiet clap, as if unable to hold back his agreement. Others nodded, murmuring their support. The tide was turning in the cabin, and Elise could feel it. Still, she also felt the old ache in her chest, the question she had buried for years. Have I hidden too long? She looked at Naomi then, at the girl who carried all her dreams forward. Naomi's eyes were wide, not with fear now, but with something brighter pride. Elise felt her throat tighten. She remembered Naomi at 8 years old, standing in front of her class science fair project on renewable energy. Other parents had chuckled kindly, saying her ideas were too ambitious for a child. Elise had crouched beside her daughter afterward and whispered, "Don't shrink for their comfort. Your ideas matter." Naomi had believed her, and Elise knew she couldn't betray that belief now by shrinking herself. The attendant, Linda, looked almost paralyzed by the tension. She whispered, "Mrs. Ellis, are you sure you want to?" Elise met her eyes firmly. "I've never been more sure. If I don't stand for my daughter now, When will I? Naomi heard those words and felt a swell of emotion. Her mother's strength was no longer abstract. It was here, alive, in the very air. Gregory slammed his hand against the headrest of seat 2B, startling the passenger beside him. This is insane. You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone? Do you know who I am? Elise took a slow breath. The years of swallowing her anger, of letting results do the talking, rose up inside her. She had taught herself patience. But patience was not passivity. She spoke with the force of someone who had waited long enough. Yes, I know who you are, she said. You are a man who believes his comfort is worth more than a young woman's dignity. You are a man who confuses privilege with right. But today, Mr. Holt, you are simply wrong, and everyone here can see it. The quiet hum of approval from passengers grew stronger. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, though she held them back. Her mother's words weren't just for Gregory, they were for her. For every time she'd questioned her place, for every time she had thought she needed permission to belong. In the back of the cabin, a passenger whispered to another, "That's her." The real CEO phones recorded every word, and Elise knew it. For once, she didn't flinch at the cameras. Maybe this was the moment she had been avoiding, the moment her face, her voice, her truth became inseparable from the airline she had built. Gregory shook his head, refusing to accept defeat. This isn't over. You'll regret crossing me. Elise's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. The only regret I carry is the years I stayed silent when people like you pushed others aside. That silence ends today. Naomi drew in a shaky breath. She saw her mother not just as the powerful CEO who owned an airline, but as a woman who had fought battles quietly for years, and who now stood openly, fearlessly, for her daughter. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, suspended between the past and the present. Something was shifting, not just in this narrow aisle, but in Elise herself. She was no longer the invisible leader. She was visible, undeniable, and unafraid. Naomi whispered so softly only her mother heard, "I'm proud of you." For Elise, those words carried more weight than any headline ever could. The air inside the cabin had shifted from discomfort to expectation. It was as if every passenger knew that a breaking point had arrived. Phones tilted higher, lenses unblinking, waiting to capture the next decisive moment. Naomi could feel her own pulse in her ears, but she sat tall, anchored by her mother's presence. Elise's hand was still resting on her shoulder, steady and sure, like a promise. Gregory Holt refused to concede. His face was flushed, his posture defiant, though the tremor in his jaw betrayed how rattled he was. He jabbed a finger toward Elise. "You think this ends with a speech? I've built my career on not backing down. People like me don't get pushed aside by theatrics." The word hung heavy, dripping with dismissal. Passengers stirred, some shaking their heads, others whispering sharply. Elise didn't react to the insult. Instead, she let silence settle until Gregory shifted uneasily. Then she spoke with the clarity of someone who knew she held the ground. "This isn't theater. Mr. Holt, this is accountability, something you may not be familiar with, but it has finally come to you." Linda Meyer, the flight attendant, stepped forward cautiously. She looked between them, her training pulling her toward de-escalation, but her instincts urging her to let Elise finish what she had started. "Mrs. Ellis," she said quietly, "what do you want me to do?" The question was simple, but its weight was monumental. The power shifted openly in that moment away from Holt, away from uncertainty and toward Elise. The passengers recognized it. The cabin was no longer his stage. Elise straightened. Her voice stayed calm, but it carried a new edge, one Naomi had only heard in rare moments when her mother made irreversible decisions. "What I want is simple. Mr. Holt will not be flying in first class today." Gasps rippled across the rows. Naomi felt her breath hitch. She had imagined many outcomes, but hearing her mother deliver that verdict aloud was something else entirely. Gregory's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You can't do that. You think you can humiliate me in front of all these people? I'll have lawyers. I'll have the media. This will ruin you." Elise met his rage with unshaken calm. "I built this airline from the ground up. I know its rules, its strengths, its weaknesses, and I know that if we bend to men like you, we destroy the dignity of everyone else who steps onto these planes. You may have power in boardrooms, Mr. Holt, but in this cabin, your reign is over." Naomi caught her breath. It was the first time she'd heard her mother use words that sharp, words meant to slice through arrogance like steel, and they did. Gregory's expression faltered, the certainty draining from his eyes as he realized this wasn't bluster. This was final. Still, he tried to recover. "I'll call your board. I'll have them remove you before the week is over." Elise tilted her head. "You're welcome to try, but you'll find that the board stands with me. They know what I stand for, and what you stand for is what will end you." Passengers began clapping softly, the sound growing as it moved down the rows. It wasn't a cheer, not yet, but an acknowledgement. The businessman in 3C nodded firmly. The woman with the toddler smiled with relief. Even the young couple in row 5 leaned into each other, whispering about finally seeing justice in action. Gregory's eyes darted around. For the first time, he was outnumbered, and worse for him, he was out of respect. Linda exhaled slowly, then turned toward Gregory. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the seat area. Security will meet you at the gate before departure." Gregory stared at her, aghast. "You're siding with her after all the years I've flown, after all the money I've spent." Linda's tone was quiet but resolute. "I'm siding with what's right." It was Naomi's turn to look at her mother, her chest aching with something close to awe. Elise hadn't shouted, hadn't bullied, hadn't raised her hand in anger. She had simply stood firm in truth, and that truth had drawn others to her side. Gregory finally exploded, his voice cracking. "You'll regret this, every one of you." He shoved past Linda, nearly tripping over a bag in the aisle, and stormed toward the exit door. His threats bounced hollow against the walls now. No one flinched. Some passengers even chuckled quietly, shaking their heads at the spectacle of his downfall. When the cabin door closed behind him, silence lingered for a beat. Then applause erupted louder this time, uncontained. People clapped, some even cheered softly. Naomi blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. The applause wasn't just for Elise, it was for the moment itself, for the shift they had all witnessed. Elise raised her hand gently, and the applause quieted. She looked around the cabin, her eyes meeting the faces of strangers who had become witnesses. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not for me, but for her. For my daughter. For choosing to see her dignity when someone tried to strip it away." Naomi swallowed hard. Her mother's words wrapped around her like armor. She realized that this wasn't just a victory for her seat. It was a declaration of belonging, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't fit. The businessman in 3C leaned across the aisle slightly, his voice warm. "Young lady, you handled yourself with grace. Don't forget that." Naomi nodded, her cheeks flushing, though her eyes remained bright. "Thank you, sir." Elise finally sat down beside her daughter. For the first time since she had entered the cabin, she allowed herself a small sigh. It wasn't exhaustion, it was release. Naomi turned toward her, whispering, "I didn't move. Mom, even when he tried to scare me." Elise brushed a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "I know, I saw, and that strength will carry you farther than any plane ever could." The engines hummed louder as the aircraft prepared for departure. Passengers settled back into their seats, some still buzzing with conversation, others sending rapid texts about what they had just witnessed. The moment would not stay in the cabin, it was already spilling outward, captured on screens, ready to ripple through the world. Naomi glanced at her laptop, still tucked under the seat. The slides for her presentation waited, silent. But now they felt heavier with meaning. She wasn't just presenting an idea in Boston. She was carrying the proof that she belonged anywhere she chose to stand. She leaned her head against the window, watching the ground crew outside wave signals across the tarmac. For the first time since boarding, she felt steady, unafraid. Her mother sat beside her, composed, yet Naomi could see the faintest softness in her eyes. Elise Ellis, the invisible CEO, had stepped into the light at last, and Naomi knew this was only the beginning. When the plane finally pushed back from the gate, a calm seemed to settle over the cabin. Though it wasn't the usual quiet that followed boarding, it was heavier, almost reverent, as if every passenger was still processing what had just unfolded. Naomi sat pressed against the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the reflection of her mother beside her faint in the glass. She tried to focus on the runway lights flickering outside, but her mind replayed everything. Gregory's sneer, her mother's voice cutting through the noise with steady conviction, the wave of support from strangers. For so long, Naomi had thought moments of injustice just passed by, leaving only bruises that people carried silently. But today had been different. Something had shifted. She turned to Elise, who sat upright, hands resting gently on her knees, her face unreadable. To anyone else, she might have looked perfectly composed. Naomi knew better. She recognized the flicker in her mother's eyes, the slight tension in her jaw. This was the face Elise wore after making a choice that couldn't be undone. "Mom," Naomi said quietly, "you didn't have to do that." Elise turned her head slowly, her gaze softening. "Didn't I?" Naomi hesitated. "I mean, you could have stayed invisible, the way you always do. Let the staff handle him, or let me handle it." Elise studied her daughter for a long moment, then leaned back in her seat. "I've spent years believing invisibility kept me safe, that it gave me freedom to build without interruption. But watching him try to strip you of your dignity, Naomi, I realized safety means nothing if it leaves you unseen when it matters most." Naomi's throat tightened. She looked down at her lap, whispering, "I was scared. I thought maybe I should move, that it would be easier. That's what people expect, right? For us to just get out of the way." Elise reached over, slipping her hand into Naomi's. "Being scared doesn't mean you were weak. You stayed. That's what strength looks like, even when your hands are shaking. Naomi blinked quickly, her eyes stinging. She didn't want to cry here, in front of all these strangers, but her mother's words cracked something inside her. For months, she had carried the quiet weight of wondering if she was good enough to compete at the summit, good enough to be taken seriously. And in that moment, she felt lighter. The businessman in 3C leaned forward slightly, catching Elise's eye. "Mrs. Ellis, I hope you don't mind me saying this. What you did, it mattered. Not just for your daughter, but for everyone here. We've all seen scenes like this before, but rarely does anyone step in like that. You showed us something we won't forget." Elise inclined her head politely. "Thank you, but it wasn't about making a show. It was about one seat, one girl, and the truth that she belongs where she is." The man smiled faintly. "Sometimes one seat can represent a lot more than just a seat." Elise turned back toward Naomi, squeezing her hand once before letting go. Naomi tucked the words away like a keepsake. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane taxied toward the runway. A low rumble vibrated through the floor, signaling the engine's power. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, imagining her solar panel models lined up back home, the tiny lights flickering as energy coursed through them. She thought about how those panels were meant to give light to people who were often left in the dark. Maybe, she realized, her project wasn't just about science. Maybe it was about justice, too. As the plane lifted off, the city lights below blurred into gold streaks. Naomi pressed her forehead against the window, watching them fade. Beside her, Elise finally allowed herself to exhale. Her shoulders dropping ever so slightly, Naomi whispered, "Did you ever feel like me? Like you didn't belong in the room?" Elise's gaze lingered on the darkening horizon. "Every day, for years. When I was your age, and even when I was twice your age, there were times I wanted to disappear because it seemed easier. But then I would think of you, even when you were just a baby. I thought, one day she'll look at me, and I need her to see someone who didn't shrink." Naomi's chest swelled with emotion. She had never heard her mother speak so plainly about her fears. For a moment, she didn't see the untouchable CEO. She saw the woman who had carried her, guided her, and quietly fought 1,000 battles Naomi had never known. A few rows behind, a passenger's phone dinged loudly. Naomi glanced back and caught sight of a headline already circulating on someone's screen. "Airline CEO confronts passenger over first-class incident." The blurry photo showed Elise standing tall in the aisle, Gregory's red face in the background. Naomi's stomach tightened. "Mom, it's already out there." Elise didn't flinch. "I expected as much. Aren't you worried?" Naomi pressed. "About the backlash." The media people twisting the story. Elise turned to her, her voice even. "Of course I'm worried. But some truths are worth the storm. If the world wants to see me now, let them. What matters is they also see you. A young black girl who didn't move from her place. That image will mean something to someone out there who has felt the same pressure you did." Naomi let those words sink in. She thought about other kids' ones who didn't have a mother who owned an airline, kids who faced moments like hers alone. Maybe, she realized, her staying in that seat wasn't just about her, it was about them too. The seatbelt sign dinged softly, and attendants began moving through the aisles with trays. Linda approached cautiously, her hands steadying the cart. She paused at row 2, her expression shifting from professional to almost personal. Mrs. Ellis, Miss Ellis, I just wanted to say, I admire what you both did. I know I should have been firmer earlier, but Elise cut her off gently. Don't apologize. You were caught between policies and power. That's not an easy place to stand, but you stood with us when it mattered. Linda's eyes glistened. Thank you. I'll remember this day for a long time. As she moved on, Naomi leaned closer to her mother, whispering, Do you think she meant it? Elise nodded slowly. Yes, and I think she's not the only one. The hum of the engines grew louder, filling the quiet spaces. Naomi rested her head against her mother's shoulder for a moment, something she hadn't done since she was much younger. Elise didn't move away. She let her daughter lean, understanding that even strength needed rest. As the minutes stretched into hours, Naomi finally opened her laptop again. She stared at the first slide of her presentation, the bold title of her solar project glowing on the screen. She thought about Boston, about the audience waiting to hear her ideas. For the first time, she didn't feel small at the thought, she felt ready. Her mother's voice broke the silence. Naomi, do you know what today was? Naomi glanced up. What Elise looked at her daughter, her expression soft but resolute. Today was the day we stopped hiding. Both of us. The night sky stretched endlessly outside the cabin windows, stars faint against the glow of the city far below. Naomi had drifted into a light doze, her laptop still open on her tray table, the cursor blinking on her slide as though urging her forward. Elise, however, stayed awake. Her eyes remained fixed on the dark glass, but her thoughts were far away, pulled back into a past she rarely allowed herself to revisit. She remembered being 15, about Naomi's age, sitting on a cracked leather bus seat that smelled of diesel and dust. Her school books lay heavy in her lap, but heavier still was the voice of her math teacher echoing in her ears. Girls like you don't usually go far in engineering. Maybe think about something more practical. She hadn't answered him then, but the words had sunk deep. Seeds of doubt she spent years clawing her way out of. She saw herself at 22, standing outside an interview room in her only suit, palms sweating. Inside, she had been greeted with polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. She could almost hear their unspoken questions. Does she really belong here? Will she handle the pressure? She remembered leaving that building without a job, walking home in the rain, and telling herself she wouldn't let one closed door define her. Then came the years of working long shifts at a small regional airline, learning every detail of the business fuel costs, scheduling, logistics, the hidden currents that kept planes in the air and companies afloat. She stayed late, came in early, and when promotions passed her by in favor of men with less experience, she bit down on the frustration and filed it away as fuel. By her 30s, she had saved enough to take her first gamble. A failing carrier on the brink of collapse was up for sale. Friends told her she was crazy. Investors told her to stay in her lane, but Elise had run the numbers, seen the cracks where efficiency could take root, and she took the leap. She remembered signing that first set of papers, her hands trembling not with fear, but with the weight of possibility. The memory made her chest ache. Every milestone had been lined with resistance. Every win had come after someone doubted her, sometimes to her face. Yet she had built Horizon Skies piece by piece, transforming it from a fledgling company into a respected airline. And, through it all, She had chosen to remain unseen, content to let the brand speak louder than her name. But tonight, she realized that silence had been both armor and cage, protecting her from attack, yes, but also keeping her from fully claiming what she had built. Watching Gregory Holt loom over Naomi had been like watching every man who had once stood over her, belittling her existence, and she had finally decided enough was enough. She turned her gaze from the window to her daughter, still sleeping lightly. Naomi's curls spilled across her cheek, her lips parted in a soft breath. Elise felt a swell of tenderness so fierce it almost hurt. Naomi was everything she had fought for, proof that resilience could be inherited, that doors forced open by one generation could become pathways for the next. Elise's mind replayed Naomi's whisper earlier. I didn't move. Those 3 words echoed louder than any headline or speech. They were the future speaking back to the past, declaring that the fight had not been in vain. A faint chime signaled the crew moving through with refreshments. Elise declined politely, still lost in thought. She wondered how much of her own story Naomi really knew. The sleepless nights, the betrayals from colleagues, the quiet tears shed in the bathroom before putting her face back together to walk into meetings. She had shielded Naomi from much of it, wanting her to grow up unburdened. But maybe it was time Naomi understood not to weigh her down, but to show her what endurance looked like. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Elise let her head rest back against the seat. Her body was tired, but her mind brimmed with an unshakable clarity. Naomi needed more than protection. She needed to see the whole truth. When Naomi stirred awake, blinking at the glow of the screen still open before her, Elise touched her hand lightly. Couldn't sleep, Naomi murmured. I was thinking. Elise replied. About him, Naomi asked, her voice heavy with sleep. About us, Elise corrected. About how we got here. About the choices I made. Some I'm proud of. Some I wish I had done differently. Naomi rubbed her eyes, shifting to face her. Like what Elise hesitated, then decided. I stayed invisible for too long. I thought it was strength, but really, it was fear. Fear of being torn apart in the open. Fear of letting people like Holt define me before I could define myself, and maybe in hiding. I showed you the wrong example. Naomi sat up straighter, her expression startled. Wrong, Mom. You built an entire airline. You're the strongest person I know. Elise smiled faintly. Strength isn't just building things quietly. It's standing in them, even when people throw stones. You saw me stand tonight, but I should have shown you sooner, because you're stepping into a world that will test you, and you need to know you're not alone in it. Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Her mother's honesty was raw, disarming in a way she had never seen. Elise continued, her voice lower. When I was your age, I let people convince me I didn't belong. It took me years to believe otherwise. I don't want you to waste that time. I want you to start from knowing your worth, even when the world tells you otherwise, especially then. Tears prickled Naomi's eyes. I was so close to giving up that seat. She whispered, if you hadn't come, but you didn't. Elise interrupted gently. You stayed. That's the part that matters. You found your voice in silence. That will carry you farther than anything I could give you. Naomi leaned against her mother's shoulder again, letting the tears slip quietly down her cheeks. They weren't tears of weakness, but of release. She had always admired her mother, but tonight she saw her differently, not just as the unshakable CEO, but as a woman who had walked through the same fire she herself was beginning to feel. Across the cabin, a passenger whispered to another, "They'll be talking about this tomorrow." Everywhere. Elise heard it, but instead of shrinking, she let the words settle. Yes, they would talk. Yes, there would be scrutiny, but for once, she didn't fear it. Naomi lifted her head, her eyes still wet but her voice firm. "I want to tell your story one day, not just mine. People should know what you went through. They should know what it took." Elise smiled, brushing her thumb across Naomi's cheek. "One day, maybe you will. But tonight, just rest. Tomorrow is yours. Boston is waiting." Naomi nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of nerves and determination. She turned back to her laptop. The words on her slide no longer just text, but a promise to herself, to her mother, to anyone who ever felt out of place. Elise closed her eyes finally, allowing the hum of the engines to soothe her. She knew the storm outside the cabin walls was already building headlines, reactions, perhaps even backlash. But inside, sitting beside her daughter, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years, because she had chosen visibility, and in doing so, she had passed a torch. By the time the plane touched down in Boston, dawn was beginning to stretch pale light across the horizon. Naomi pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window, watching the first rays shimmer over the tarmac. Her stomach fluttered with a nervous energy that was equal parts exhaustion and anticipation. Today was the day she had worked toward for months, yet the events of the flight had made it feel so much larger than a simple presentation. Passengers began to unbuckle their seatbelts, chatter breaking out in low waves. Naomi overheard snatches of conversation, people whispering about Elise, about Gregory Holt, about the videos already circulating online. One man murmured, "It's on 3 news sites already." A woman added, "She handled him better than any politician I've ever seen." Naomi shrank slightly in her seat, both proud and overwhelmed that her mother's name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Elise herself sat still, her posture straight, her expression calm. But Naomi could sense the currents moving beneath the surface. Elise was already calculating what awaited her outside the airport walls press. Shareholders. Perhaps backlash from those who never wanted her to lead in the first place. Yet none of it showed on her face. To the world, she remained unshakable. As they stepped off the plane, the rush of cool morning air filled Naomi's lungs. She held her backpack straps tightly, trying to anchor herself. Elise walked just ahead, her heels clicking confidently on the jet bridge floor. A few passengers stopped to thank her personally before leaving. One young woman, no older than 20, caught Elise's hand briefly. "I've never seen someone like me stand up like that." "Thank you." Elise smiled softly, giving her hand a small squeeze before moving on. The terminal was already alive with movement. Travelers hustled to gates, coffee cups steaming in their hands. But near baggage claim, a cluster of cameras waited, reporters' lenses glinting like a row of sharp eyes. Naomi's pulse spiked. "They're here already," she whispered. Elise's hand brushed against her daughter's as they walked. "Keep your head high. You don't owe them fear." But Naomi couldn't ignore the sudden burst of questions as the crowd spotted them. "Mrs. Ellis, is it true you personally removed a passenger from first class? How long have you secretly been CEO of Horizon Skies? Do you believe your decision last night will affect shareholder trust?" Microphones jutted forward. Naomi instinctively pressed closer to her mother, her chest tight. Elise stopped, not rushing, not shrinking. She faced the cameras with a calmness Naomi envied. "One day ago, my daughter was told by word and by tone that she didn't belong in a seat she rightfully held," Elise said evenly. "I defended her not as a CEO, but as a mother. But since you ask, yes, I am the CEO of Horizon Skies, and if protecting dignity costs me reputation, then so be it. Our airline was built to carry people with safety and respect. If we lose that, we lose everything." Her words rang clear, not loud, but steady, like a bell cutting through fog. Naomi felt a surge of pride swell inside her. Reporters shouted more questions, but Elise didn't linger. She guided Naomi firmly past the crowd, their pace measured, not hurried. At the curb, a car waited arranged quietly by Elise's assistant. The driver, a woman with kind eyes, opened the door. Elise ushered Naomi inside before sliding in herself. The doors closed, muting the chaos outside. Naomi let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Elise glanced at her. "You did well." Naomi shook her head. "I didn't say a word." "You didn't need to." Elise replied, "Sometimes presence is enough." The car moved smoothly through Boston's early traffic. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance, the rising sun painting their glass facades gold. Naomi leaned her head back, trying to calm the storm in her chest. Her thoughts kept drifting to the summit. It felt almost surreal that, after such a night, she still had to stand on stage and present her project. Her mother must have sensed her worry. "You're ready," Elise said quietly. "Don't let last night distract you. Let it strengthen you." Naomi looked at her laptop bag resting on the seat. The slides, the prototypes, the months of work all waiting, but she realized her project wasn't just data points and designs anymore. It carried the weight of last night, the message of standing firm, of claiming space. She straightened slightly. By the time they arrived at the convention center, the plaza outside was already buzzing with students, teachers, and organizers. Banners fluttered in the morning breeze National Youth Tech Summit 2025. Naomi felt her stomach flip as she stepped out of the car. Inside, the air was electric. Students carried prototypes, laptops, posters. Judges moved briskly with clipboards in hand. The hum of ambition filled the space. And for a moment, Naomi felt small again, just one girl among hundreds. But then she remembered the aisle of the plane, her mother's voice, the strangers who had clapped. She lifted her chin. At check-in, a volunteer handed her a badge Naomi Ellis, Solar Access for All. Seeing her name printed so boldly sent a shiver through her. Elise pinned the lanyard around her daughter's neck, her fingers lingering for a moment. "You wear this not just for yourself, but for everyone watching. Remember that." Naomi nodded, her throat too tight for words. As they walked toward the exhibition hall, whispers followed. Some students recognized her from the viral clips that had already spread overnight. A few even pointed discreetly. Naomi flushed, but Elise placed a hand at the small of her back, guiding her forward. Her booth was simple, a model solar panel setup, a screen looping her demonstration, her slides ready to project. She began laying out her materials, her hands shaking slightly. Elise stood nearby, not interfering, but offering the kind of steady presence that had carried Naomi through countless late nights of preparation. When the first judge approached, Naomi's nerves spiked. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remember the runway lights outside the plane window. Her mother's calm voice, her own whispered words, "I won't move." She lifted her eyes, smiled, and began. Her voice wavered at first, but as she explained the design, how her solar system used inexpensive materials, how it could reduce electricity costs for low-income families, confidence slowly replaced fear. She saw the judge's expression shift from polite curiosity to genuine interest. By the time she finished, her hands no longer trembled. Elise watched from the sidelines, her chest swelling. She saw in her daughter what she had always known, brilliance wrapped in quiet determination. And as the crowd around the booth grew, Elise realized that Naomi wasn't just presenting technology, she was presenting possibility. Naomi caught her mother's eye once during the presentation. Elise gave the smallest nod, a silent reminder. "You belong here." Naomi straightened her shoulders, her voice growing stronger as she fielded questions. By the time the first round of judging ended, Naomi felt something she hadn't before, not just relief, but ownership. She had stood, she had spoken, and she had been heard. Later, as they sat together in a quiet corner of the convention center, Naomi leaned against her mother with a tired smile. "I think I did it." Elise kissed the crown of her daughter's head. "You didn't just do it, you claimed it. Whatever comes next, no one can take that from you." Naomi closed her eyes, her exhaustion pulling at her, but in her chest burned a steady flame. She thought of the seat on the plane, the stage here in Boston, the long path still ahead. For the first time, she felt certain she could walk it not alone, but carrying the strength passed down to her. By mid-morning, the convention center was alive with the hum of ambition. Hundreds of voices echoed in the vaulted hall, students rehearsing lines, volunteers calling out directions, judges moving briskly with clipboards tucked under their arms. Naomi stood near the edge of the main stage, her badge swinging lightly against her chest as she clutched her laptop. She could feel her heart thudding like a drum. Her booth presentation earlier had been only the beginning. Now, the finalists were expected to stand on stage and pitch their projects to the entire hall, a sea of faces, cameras, and live stream feeds that reached thousands online. Naomi's name had been called, her project ranked among the top 10. She had dreamed of this moment for months, but the reality of it now made her knees feel unsteady. Her mother stood a few paces behind her, hands clasped calmly, her expression unreadable. Elise wasn't one to overwhelm her daughter with constant reassurance. Instead, her presence was steady, an anchor Naomi could lean on without words. The announcer's voice boomed across the room. Next up, Naomi Ellis, presenting her project, Solar Access for All. Please welcome her to the stage. Applause broke out as Naomi stepped forward. The bright lights caught her, momentarily blinding, and she blinked hard to adjust. She placed her laptop on the podium, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up the first slide. For a moment, the silence of expectation pressed down on her, and she thought she might choke. But then she heard it, her mother's voice in her memory. "You belong in every room you walk into, because you've done the work to get there." Naomi inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders, and began. "My name is Naomi Ellis, and my project is about making solar power affordable for families who need it most." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. Slide by slide, she explained her design, how she had repurposed inexpensive materials, how her system could cut energy bills by half, how neighborhoods often overlooked by major infrastructure could benefit most. She described late nights soldering wires, testing models, tracking every watt of energy captured. As she spoke, her nerves began to fade. She thought about the seat on the plane, about Holt's words, about the pressure to move, and how she had stayed. That memory fueled her, reminding her that this stage was just another seat she had a right to claim. Her voice grew stronger, steadier, carrying conviction. At one point, she paused, looking out at the audience. She hadn't planned to, but the words came unbidden. Last night, I was told I didn't belong where I was sitting, that I was too young, too out of place to deserve a seat I had already earned. I almost moved, but I didn't. And standing here today, I realize this project isn't just about technology. It's about belonging. Energy should belong to everyone. Dignity should belong to everyone. Access should belong to everyone. The hall went still. Judges leaned forward, their pens paused. Students in the audience exchanged looks, some nodding, others raising their phones to record. Naomi swallowed, her throat tight, but pressed on with her conclusion. This project started in my garage, but it doesn't end there. It's about lighting homes that have gone dark too long, about giving families the chance to save, to grow, to breathe a little easier. It's about showing that innovation isn't just for those with privilege, but for every person willing to imagine something better. She clicked to the final slide, a single phrase glowing on the screen, "Power for all." The applause was immediate, rising in waves. Naomi exhaled, the tension draining from her shoulders as she stepped back. She caught sight of her mother standing at the side, eyes glistening though her expression remained steady. Elise gave her the smallest nod, a gesture that said everything you did it. As Naomi walked off the stage, her legs trembling with adrenaline, Elise met her halfway. For once, Elise didn't hold back. She pulled her daughter into an embrace, strong and fierce, whispering, "That was your moment, and you claimed it." Naomi buried her face against her mother's shoulder, her voice muffled. "I thought I was going to fail, but you didn't." Elise said simply, "You stood, and that's all it takes to change the story." In the audience, whispers spread quickly. Some recognized Naomi from the viral video of the flight already trending online. Clips of her speech began uploading almost instantly. Her words about belonging striking a chord beyond the convention walls. Meanwhile, Elise found herself drifting into thought as she guided Naomi back to their seats. Watching her daughter on stage had stirred something deep within her, a reminder of her own first boardroom presentation. Decades ago, she had stood in front of a row of skeptical investors, her slides meticulously prepared, her hands shaking just out of sight. She remembered the looks on their faces, doubt etched in every line, and how she had forced her voice steady, convincing them not just with numbers but with conviction. But Naomi's words had gone beyond conviction. They carried something Elise herself had rarely dared to voice vulnerability. Elise realized her daughter was already braver than she had been at that age, where Elise had built walls of composure. Naomi had opened herself to the room, and the room had responded. The judging continued with other students, but Naomi's presentation lingered in the air. Strangers approached her during breaks, offering encouragement. One boy whispered, "What you said, it made me think about my own project differently. Thank you." Naomi blushed, mumbling thanks, but inside, a spark glowed brighter. Elise sat nearby, watching every exchange. Her thoughts pulled in two directions. On one hand, she felt immense pride. On the other, she knew the storm outside was still building. Reporters weren't going to let the incident on the plane fade quietly. Gregory Holt's name was already surfacing in articles, his behavior dissected and condemned, and Elise's name, her long-hidden name, was being thrust into the spotlight. For years, she had kept her ownership quiet, letting the airline's public image rest on its brand rather than her identity. Now, that shield was gone. People would want interviews, answers, explanations. Shareholders would demand clarity. Rivals would seize on the chaos. Elise could already hear the storm pressing at the edges of this moment. Yet, when she looked at Naomi, flushed with pride and relief, she knew she wouldn't change what had happened. Some storms were worth walking into. As the summit stretched into the afternoon, whispers of Naomi's presentation grew louder. By the time judges returned to announce winners, anticipation rippled through the crowd. Naomi sat beside her mother, her hands clasped tight, her pulse hammering. Elise placed a steady hand over hers. The announcer's voice boomed once more. In third place, in second place, and in first place. The award goes to Naomi Ellis for Solar Access for All. Naomi's breath caught. She barely heard the applause around her as her name echoed across the hall. Elise squeezed her hand before releasing it, urging her forward. Naomi stumbled toward the stage, her legs unsteady but her heart soaring. She accepted the award, her hands trembling as she held the plaque. Looking out at the audience, she caught sight of her mother again. Elise's eyes were wet now, her usual composure cracking just enough to show pride unmasked. Naomi lifted the award slightly, a silent gesture of thanks not just to the judges but to her mother, who had carried her to this moment. The hall roared with applause. Naomi smiled through the blur of tears, realizing that this wasn't just about science or awards. It was about claiming space, about proving that staying in her seat both on that plane and here on this stage had been worth it. And somewhere deep inside, Elise knew this was bigger than either of them. This was legacy unfolding before her eyes. The award ceremony had barely ended when the ripple turned into a wave. By the time Naomi and Elise stepped out into the crisp Boston air, the plaza was packed. Students swarmed with congratulations. Reporters pressed forward with microphones, and flashes from cameras sparked like sudden lightning. Naomi clutched her award to her chest, overwhelmed, while Elise's hand rested firmly at her daughter's back, guiding her through the noise. "Naomi, how does it feel to win first place?" one reporter shouted. "Mrs. Ellis, do you have a comment on the viral video from last night?" Another asked. "Do you think this win was influenced by the attention surrounding the incident?" Naomi's throat went dry. She had no idea how to answer, so she looked up at her mother. Elise stepped forward slightly, her voice calm and measured. Naomi won because of the work she put in. Nothing more, nothing less. The story you saw last night is not about influence, it's about integrity, and today is about her project. The press didn't back down, but Elise's tone carried a gravity that made them hesitate. She slipped her arm around Naomi, steering her toward the car waiting at the curb. As they slid into the back seat, Naomi finally exhaled. "I don't know how you do it," she murmured. "They were everywhere, and you didn't even flinch." Elise gave her a small smile. "I've had practice, but even with practice, it never gets easier. You just learn to breathe through the noise." Naomi leaned back, still clutching her award, staring at the city rolling by outside. For the first time, she realized the spotlight she was stepping into wasn't temporary. Winning the summit had already put her on a stage. Last night's viral video had only magnified it. Together, they had created something bigger than she could grasp. Back at their hotel, Elise excused herself for a brief call. Naomi sank onto the bed, scrolling through her phone. Notifications flooded in tags, messages, clips of her speech already shared thousands of times. Headlines flashed, "Teen Innovator Wins National Summit." Daughter of Airline CEO speaks out on belonging. One seat sparks a movement. Naomi's chest tightened. It was exhilarating, but terrifying too. Meanwhile, Elise paced quietly in the adjoining room, phone pressed to her ear. On the line was Robert Crane, chairman of Horizon Sky's board. His voice was clipped, urgent. "Elise, you've seen the news?" "Yes, this incident is everywhere. Investors are calling, demanding answers. Gregory Holt has already filed a complaint he's threatening legal action, claiming defamation." Elise's jaw tightened. Defamation. There were dozens of witnesses. Robert, cameras. He humiliated a teenager in public. "That may be true," Crane said cautiously, "but perception is complicated. Some are questioning whether you acted professionally, revealing your position so publicly. You've kept your ownership quiet for years, and now, well, now it's out." Elise closed her eyes briefly. "I revealed my position to protect my daughter. If that rattles investors, then perhaps they should question their priorities." There was a pause. "We'll need to convene an emergency session tomorrow morning. You know how fragile shareholder confidence can be." "I'll be there," Elise said firmly, ending the call. She stood for a moment, her hand still tight around the phone. She had known this was coming, but the weight of it pressed down harder than she expected. For years, she had fought to keep the airline's success about its people, not her identity. Now the curtain was pulled back, and there was no hiding. When she returned to the room, Naomi looked up, concern etched on her face. "Is it about him?" Elise nodded. "And about the company. There are conversations I'll need to have." Naomi hugged her award closer. "Because of me," Elise crossed the room, kneeling in front of her daughter. "No, don't carry that weight. Holt is responsible for Holt. I only regret not standing sooner, not showing the world who I was before it came to this." Naomi bit her lip. "Are you scared?" For a long moment. Elise considered lying, but she saw the need for honesty in her daughter's eyes. "Yes," she admitted softly, "scared of losing control, scared of what people will say, but fear doesn't decide what's right. We do." Naomi reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. Elise smiled faintly, feeling strength flow both ways. That evening, as they ate dinner in the quiet corner of the hotel restaurant, strangers approached their table one by one. A man in his 60s leaned down, his voice low. "I watched my granddaughter give up her seat on a bus last year because of someone like him. Seeing you both last night, it gave me hope." Later, a young woman stopped by, her eyes glistening. "I've always been afraid to speak up, but your words today, they made me think maybe I can." Each encounter added weight to the day, reminding Naomi and Elise that what had happened wasn't just about them anymore. It was becoming something larger, something that belonged to many. Later, in their room, Naomi sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through more headlines. She read aloud softly, "Belonging, speech gains millions of views overnight." She glanced at her mother. "People are listening. Mom, really listening, Elise, sitting at the desk with her notes for the board meeting, looked over at her daughter. Then it's up to us to decide what they hear next. Stories fade if no one carries them forward. You started something today. Naomi, don't let it stop here. Naomi nodded, determination stirring beneath her exhaustion. She thought about all the kids who might see her clip online, who might recognize themselves in her fear, her trembling hands, her decision to stay. Maybe they'd believe they could stay too. As night deepened, Elise finally set her papers aside and sat on the edge of Naomi's bed. Her daughter was already drifting, the award still nestled against her like a pillow. Elise brushed a curl gently from Naomi's forehead, whispering, "Sleep, my love. Tomorrow, I'll face the board. Tonight, this victory is yours." For a moment, Elise allowed herself to simply watch her daughter sleep. Pride, fear, love all tangled inside her chest. She knew the coming days would be hard. The media storm, the shareholders, Gregory Holt's threats. But none of it mattered as much as this. Naomi had stood. She had spoken. She had been heard. And that, Elise thought, was worth any storm. The next morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Boston morning that carried a chill even indoors. Elise dressed with precision, sliding into a dark suit that carried no ornament, no softness, only quiet authority. Naomi watched from the bed, her award still resting on the nightstand beside her, as her mother tied her scarf with steady hands. "You don't have to go in looking like you're going to war," Naomi murmured, her voice still groggy. Elise's reflection in the mirror didn't flinch. "When you walk into a room where people doubt you, it's always a war. Better to look prepared than unarmed." Naomi hugged her knees. "Will they listen?" Elise turned, kneeling in front of her daughter, just as she had the night before. "They'll hear me. Whether they listen is their choice, but I won't let them silence me, not now." Downstairs, a car waited. Elise kissed Naomi's forehead and whispered, "Stay here. Rest. This is not a battle you need to fight." Naomi wanted to protest, but the look in her mother's eyes made her swallow the words. Elise needed to do this alone. At Horizon Skies' Boston office, the boardroom buzzed with tension even before Elise entered. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lights, surrounded by men and women in suits, their voices low but urgent. At the head sat Robert Crane, his expression carefully neutral. Beside him, two shareholders scrolled through their phones. Headlines splashed across their screens. The moment Elise stepped in, the room quieted. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she walked to the open seat at the center. She placed her folder down, lifted her chin, and waited. Robert cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. Elise, we have quite a bit to discuss, I'm aware," she said evenly. One shareholder, a sharp-faced man named Gerald Whitman, leaned forward. "Let's not waste time. The video is everywhere." Our CEO revealed herself in a public confrontation, dragging our company into the spotlight. Investors are panicking. "Do you realize what this has done to our stock overnight?" Elise folded her hands calmly. "Yes, it rose by 2 points." The room stilled. Gerald blinked. "What?" She slid a sheet across the table numbers from the morning reports. Public confidence increased. Why? Because customers saw an airline standing for dignity, not just profit. The world is tired of corporations hiding behind silence. What happened last night wasn't a liability. It was proof of principle. Another board member, a woman named Harriet Cole, frowned. And what of Holt? He's threatening litigation. If he pursues this, it could cost millions. Elise's gaze sharpened. Then let him. Do you really want to be the board that sides with a man who humiliated a 16-year-old girl in public? The evidence is overwhelming. He won't win. But if we bow to him, we'll lose more than money. We'll lose trust. Robert steepled his fingers, studying her. The trust argument is noble. Elise, but you've kept your role discreet for years. Why expose yourself now? Why risk this level of attention? For a moment, Elise let silence fill the room. She looked at each face, one by one, before answering. Because invisibility has a cost. For years, I believed hiding protected me. But last night, my daughter was told she didn't belong. If I had stayed silent, I would have taught her that fear is stronger than truth. That is a lesson I will never teach. The words settled heavily. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Others looked down at their notes. Gerald scoffed. So this is personal. Then you're putting emotion above business. Elise's voice dropped. Quiet but cutting. Business without principle is exploitation. If that's the kind of airline you want, then perhaps you've chosen the wrong CEO. A ripple of tension moved through the room. Robert raised a hand before Gerald could respond. Elise, what do you propose the world is watching? If we're to embrace this rather than bury it, what's the plan? She opened her folder, sliding out a document she had prepared overnight. The plan is reform, not cosmetic. Real reform. Her voice steadied as she outlined it. A dignity protocol, ensuring that every passenger grievance involving discrimination would be independently reviewed, not buried under bureaucracy. A visibility commitment, where leadership, including herself, would step forward publicly, accountable not only for profit margins but for values. A youth advisory program to amplify the voices of young innovators and passengers, proven that the next generation belongs in the conversation. And finally, a transparency report, released annually, detailing every complaint, resolution, and measure taken to improve equity. These are not marketing strategies, Elise said firmly. They are structural changes. If we do this, we don't just weather a scandal. We redefine what it means to fly with horizon skies. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hum of the HVAC system filled the silence. Then Harriet leaned forward, her voice softer. You believe this will strengthen us, I know it will, Elise replied. Because dignity is not a cost, it's an investment. And last night proved people are willing to believe in a company that believes in them. Robert studied her closely, then finally nodded. Very well, we'll put it to a vote. The hands went up one by one, some reluctant, some firm. In the end, the majority leaned in her favor. Gerald scowled but did not dissent. It's decided, Robert said. We move forward with your reforms. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Elise, this changes everything. You understand that her lips curved into the faintest smile. That's the point. When Elise left the building, the cold air bit at her cheeks, but inside, a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in years, she felt not just like the woman behind the curtain, but the woman on the stage. Back at the hotel, Naomi leapt up as soon as she saw her. How did it go? Elise set her bag down, her eyes softening as she looked at her daughter. We have work ahead, but the board agreed. Things will change. Naomi's smile was wide, her relief palpable. "You did it." Elise shook her head gently. "We did it. You showed them why change is worth fighting for. I only gave them the tools to follow." Naomi wrapped her arms around her mother, the award pressing awkwardly between them, and Elise let out a laugh, a rare, unguarded sound. As they stood there, mother and daughter bound by both victory and the challenges yet to come, Elise realized something. The seat Naomi had refused to give up on that plane had become more than a moment. It was a movement, and together they were going to carry it forward. The following week unfolded like a storm that refused to die down. Naomi had barely returned to her school routine when her face began appearing across national news outlets. Her summit speech replayed in clips with bold headlines underneath "Teen Innovator Speaks Out on Belonging." Every channel, every site seemed to be dissecting both her words and the viral video from the plane. At first, Naomi recoiled from the attention. She avoided the cafeteria, slipped into classrooms with her hood pulled low, and tried to ignore the way whispers followed her. But even in her effort to stay invisible, she noticed the way some students looked at her differently. A girl in chemistry class slipped her a note that read, "I almost quit the robotics team because of how they treat me. Then I saw your speech. I decided to stay." Naomi folded the note carefully, slipping it into the back of her notebook, her chest tight. It wasn't just about her anymore. Her words were rippling outward. Meanwhile, Elise found herself in a different kind of spotlight. News anchors clamored for interviews. Shareholders demanded clarity. Community leaders invited her to panels. And, through it all, she remained deliberate, measured in her tone, uncompromising in her stance. In one televised interview, a reporter leaned forward, eyebrows arched. "Mrs. Ellis, some critics say you exploited the incident on the plane to elevate your daughter and to gain public sympathy. How do you respond?" Elise didn't blink. If defending a child's right to sit in the seat she paid for is exploitation, then we have redefined the word. My daughter earned her place at that summit through work, not headlines. And if her story resonates, it's because people recognize their own struggles in hers. Clips of that answer spread quickly, applauded by some, criticized by others. But Elise didn't chase approval. She held steady, knowing storms were not quelled by chasing every gust of wind. As for Gregory Holt, his name became a fixture in headlines, though not for reasons he would have chosen. Former colleagues began to step forward, recounting years of behavior, long ignored remarks in boardrooms, dismissals of female staff, patterns of entitlement. His reputation, once polished, crumbled quickly under scrutiny. Within a month, he resigned from his firm under mutual agreement, though everyone knew it was forced. Naomi watched all of it unfold with a complicated mix of emotions. Part of her felt vindicated justice at last, but another part of her felt unsettled by how quickly public opinion could destroy a person. One evening, as she sat with her mother at the kitchen table, she whispered, "Does it ever scare you that all of this could turn just as fast against us?" Elise sipped her tea before answering. "Yes, public favor is fickle. That's why you don't build your foundation on it. You build on principle. If the winds shift, you may bend, but you won't break." Naomi nodded slowly, letting the words settle. She thought of her project, of the kids who had written to her since her win messages from all over the country, from young people who had felt pushed aside or overlooked. She realized she couldn't hide from the spotlight anymore. The spotlight wasn't just on her, it was on the message she carried. The first time she agreed to an interview, she felt her stomach twist in knots. The studio lights reminded her of the summit stage, harsh and blinding. The host leaned toward her, smiling warmly. "Naomi, your words about belonging have inspired millions. When you stood up there, did you realize how much it would resonate?" Naomi shook her head, her voice quiet but steady. "No. I was just telling the truth about how it felt. I didn't know anyone would care, but maybe that's the point. A lot of us feel like we don't belong. And when we say it out loud, we realize we're not alone." The clip went viral overnight, not because it was polished, but because it was unguarded. People commented on her sincerity, her youth paired with wisdom that felt earned rather than rehearsed. Elise watched the interview from the kitchen, pride flickering across her face, but she also felt a pang of protectiveness. Naomi was still just 16, navigating waters that seasoned leaders sometimes drowned in. At Horizon Skies, Elise pressed forward with her reforms. The Dignity Protocol was announced publicly, earning praise from advocacy groups. Transparency reports were scheduled for release. Some investors grumbled, but customer loyalty surged. Families wrote letters thanking Elise for showing that corporations could stand for more than profit. At a press conference unveiling the reforms, Elise spoke firmly. "Every person deserves respect at 30,000 feet. Our commitment is not just to carry passengers, but to carry dignity. One without the other is failure." Reporters called it one of the strongest statements from an airline executive in years. For Elise, it was simply truth. But at home, away from the cameras, Elise allowed herself to feel the strain. Late at night, she sat at the edge of her bed, the weight of decisions pressing heavy on her shoulders. Naomi sometimes peeked in, seeing her mother with her head bowed, hands clasped as though holding invisible burdens. One night, Naomi slipped in and sat beside her. "You always look so strong in front of them," Naomi said softly. "But I see you like this too." Elise turned, meeting her daughter's gaze. For once, she didn't mask her exhaustion. Strength isn't about never bending. "Naomi, it's about bending and standing back up. Some days I stand taller, some days I don't. But I keep standing." Naomi leaned against her, resting her head on her shoulder. "I think that's what makes you strong. Not the part where you never fall, but the part where you always get up." Elise wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. In that moment, she realized her daughter wasn't just learning from her, she was teaching her too. As the days stretched into weeks, Naomi's life settled into a strange rhythm. School during the day, interviews or speaking invitations in the evenings, quiet dinners at home with her mother when they could steal them. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. For the first time, she felt her voice mattered not just in her project, but in the wider world. And while Elise braced against the pressures of leadership, she found strength in watching Naomi bloom. She had once believed invisibility was safety. Now she saw her daughter stepping boldly into visibility, and though it frightened her, it also filled her with hope. Together, they were navigating a new chapter, messy, public, uncharted, but they were navigating it together. The auditorium lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. Rows upon rows of people filled the seats. Students, activists, executives, parents with children balanced on their laps. It wasn't just another conference. This was a gathering born out of a moment that had shaken its way across the country. The banner above the stage read, "Voices of Belonging, a national forum on justice and innovation." Backstage, Naomi paced in small circles, her palms damp. She wore a simple navy dress, her summit award pinned delicately at her side like a quiet badge of honor. Elise stood nearby, composed as ever, though Naomi could see the faint crease of tension in her mother's brow. "Mom," Naomi whispered, "what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing?" Elise turned, placing both hands on her daughter's shoulders. "There are no wrong words when you speak your truth. Remember that. They came here to hear you, not a perfect speech." Naomi nodded, swallowing hard. She remembered the plane, the aisle, the way Holt's shadow had loomed. She remembered the summit stage, her voice trembling until it steadied. Tonight was another step in the same journey. The announcer's voice echoed from the stage. "Please welcome Naomi Ellis and Elise Ellis." The applause rose like a wave, carrying them forward. Naomi stepped into the light first, her mother just behind. She blinked against the brightness, her heart racing as the audience leaned forward. Phones lifted to record. Elise gave her a small nod. "Go on." Naomi approached the podium, her fingers curling around the edges. For a moment, the words tangled in her throat. But then she looked out at the crowd, so many faces, some weary, some hopeful, and something inside her steadied. "When I was on a plane, not long ago," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I was told I didn't belong in my seat, that I was too young, too out of place. I almost gave in, I almost moved, but I didn't. And in that moment, I learned something I will never forget. Belonging is not given, it's claimed." The silence in the room was electric, every ear tuned to her. Naomi's confidence grew as she continued. She spoke about her project, about energy as a form of justice, about how innovation should serve not just the privileged but the forgotten. Her words carried the same unpolished sincerity that had made her summit speech unforgettable. Then she paused, glancing back at her mother. Elise stepped forward, her presence commanding yet calm. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades. For years, I believed the safest way to lead was to remain unseen, to build quietly, to let the brand speak louder than the person behind it. But silence, I've learned, can be another form of surrender. When my daughter was challenged, I had a choice: hide or stand. I stood, not because I'm fearless, but because some moments demand that we show ourselves. The room seemed to lean closer. Elise's tone was steady, her words deliberate. The airline I built was never meant to be only about profit. It was meant to be about people, every person, every seat, every voice. And today, I promise this Horizon Skies will not only fly people to their destinations, we will stand for their dignity along the way. Applause swelled, but Elise raised a hand, asking for quiet. Yet this isn't just about one company. It's about how we choose to treat each other in boardrooms, in classrooms, on airplanes, and in every place where power meets vulnerability. My daughter taught me that. She reminded me that the next generation doesn't need us to shield them from the storm. They need us to stand with them in it. Naomi felt tears sting her eyes. She hadn't expected her mother to speak of her so directly, so openly. She wiped at her cheek quickly, then stepped forward again. "When I won the summit," Naomi said, her voice catching slightly, "I thought it was about solar panels, But I realize now it was about something bigger. It was about choosing to stay in the seat I earned. I want every kid who's been told they don't belong to hear this you do. Your voice matters. Your place matters. Don't give it up. Not for anyone. The audience erupted into applause, standing now, the sound filling every corner of the hall. Naomi blinked through the blur of tears, her chest aching with a mix of relief and pride. Elise reached for her daughter's hand, lifting it gently. For a moment, they stood together in the light, mother and daughter, their shadows cast long behind them. Afterward, as they stepped backstage, Naomi clutched her mother's hand tightly. "Did you mean it? What you said about me teaching you?" Elise looked at her, eyes soft, every word. "You've taught me that strength isn't silence, it's presence. And watching you today, I know the future is in good hands." Naomi leaned against her, the exhaustion finally catching up with her, but her smile was wide. "I wasn't alone," she whispered. "No." Elise agreed, pulling her close. "You never were." The forum would make headlines the next morning. Clips of Naomi's words, "Belonging is not given, it's claimed," would circle the globe, adopted as a rallying cry for young people everywhere. Elise's vow of dignity would be quoted in articles and speeches, reshaping Horizon Sky's image from just another airline to a symbol of accountability. But for mother and daughter, the real victory was quieter. It was in the way Naomi's shoulders no longer slumped when she walked into a room. It was in the way Elise no longer felt the need to hide behind titles or shadows. It was in the bond between them, strengthened by fire, carried forward with hope. That night, as they returned to their hotel, Naomi set her award on the nightstand beside her bed, next to the folded note from her classmate. She stared at both for a long moment before whispering, "We did it, Mom." Elise kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering back, "We're only just beginning." And as Naomi drifted into sleep, Elise sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. For the first time in years, she felt light, not because the world had grown easier, but because she and her daughter were walking through it together, their voices steady, their place claimed. The story of Naomi and Elise Ellis reminds us that true belonging is never simply handed out. It's claimed through courage, dignity, and unwavering self-respect. Life often places us in moments of confrontation, where silence may feel safer than speaking out. Yet, silence can quietly affirm injustice. Elise teaches us that strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand even when fear is present. Naomi's courage shows that even the youngest voices can challenge deep-seated prejudices and inspire change. For older audiences, the lesson is deeply personal. Many of us have lived through times where speaking up came with heavy risks, but we are reminded that every act of standing firm, no matter how small, plants seeds for the future. The courage we show today becomes the inheritance of the next generation. In our daily lives, whether in workplaces, families, or communities, the call is the same to defend dignity not just for ourselves, but for others. Because when we choose to stand with principle, we create a world where belonging isn't a privilege for a few, but a right for all. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Stories like this matter because they remind us of the strength we all carry inside. If this touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life, and together, we can keep spreading hope, justice, and dignity.